Hi everybody, my name is Casey Shipman and I'm the Program Coordinator for Instant Israel at CJE SeniorLife. Today we'll be doing another installation of Shakespeare 101. So we're going to be covering A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I'm sure a lot of you are fairly familiar with. So I figured what better way to talk about this wonderful play than to be surrounded by nature in my solarium with my little creature of the forest, my dog Theo. So in my solarium, the roof opens up. You crank it and it opens to let the sun and the breeze come in. We've got lots of little plants all along the floor and hanging on the walls. So it's a really, really nice place to come and get some peace and tranquility. Even though you can still hear the busyness of the city outside, it's a little oasis and escape for me to come to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so welcome back to Shakespeare 101. We're going to be looking at A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I know I read in school a couple times. I'm sure you've come across the play itself or seeing the play in theaters or a movie, whatever it might be, because it's a very popular story that gets retold over and over again. So I want to give kind of a synopsis of the show, talk a little bit about the history and adaptations of it, and then we'll do a screening based on the play. So Act 1, we see Duke Theseus and his recently conquered war bride-to-be, Hippolyta, anticipate their upcoming wedding. Not sure how to say this name exactly. It's some kind of Greek, I think. Aegeus, maybe? A nobleman arrives at court and he's complaining about his daughter Hermia, who refuses to marry Demetrius, who is her father's choice of husband. She's in love with a man named Lysander instead. And despite Hermia's protests, Theseus, the Duke, invokes Athenian law against her, which means she has to decide if she's going to agree to marry Demetrius, become a nun, or be put to death. So thankfully times have changed a lot since then. Hermia and Lysander plan to meet in the night and run away to the forest to get married. They tell Hermia's best friend, Helena, about their plan, and Helena is in love with Demetrius, and she tells Demetrius their plan in order to get him on her side, get him to like her more. So they decide they're going to pursue the couple and follow them into the forest as well. Meanwhile, another group is headed to the forest, a group of workmen led by Nick Bottom, who find out about their cast list for an upcoming play called Pyramus and Thisbe. It's a play that they want to perform for the Duke's upcoming wedding. So they meet in the forest that same night to do their first rehearsal for the show. So the play, that's how it's set up, with everybody escaping to the forest, essentially. Act 2, Oberon and Titania are the king and queen of the fairies, and they're at war with each other over a child that Titania has adopted. Hoping to punish Titania, Oberon sends his servant Puck in quest of a magical flower, which when you squeeze it onto a sleeping person's eyes, it makes them fall in love with the first person they see when they wake up. So he wants to mess with her by, playing this trick on her, essentially, to get his way. Oberon witnesses Demetrius's rejection of Helena when they're in the forest together trying to find Hermia and Lysander, and he feels sorry for Helena, so he tells Puck to enchant Demetrius with the flower and make him fall in love with Helena. However, they don't know that there's another couple in the forest, so Puck comes across Lysander instead and casts the spell on him with the flower. So he becomes the one who falls for Helena. And so as they're going through the forest, Helena is being chased by both Lysander and Demetrius. And since neither of them liked her before, and all of a sudden they're both in love with her, she thinks it's this mean trick, or sorry, not both of them, just Lysander is in love with her. She thinks it's a trick that Lysander and Hermia are playing on her. So she runs away. And in the meantime, Hermia wakes up and searches for Lysander and sees that he's not around. Hello. In Act 3, Puck finds the group of actors with Nick Bottom performing, and he decides he's going to have some fun with them, and he transforms Bottom, Nicholas Bottom, into a donkey. All the other actors are obviously terrified by this, so they run away, and Bottom stays there by himself, just singing and trying to calm himself down because he doesn't know what's happening. And nearby is Titania, who's been sleeping, and his singing wakes her up, and she falls in love with him. So Puck brings the news to Oberon that his trick on Titania has worked, and that Demetrius has been put under a spell that Oberon asked him to do. But Oberon realizes that Puck put the spell on the wrong guy. So Oberon himself applies the flower magic to Demetrius's eyes. So now both Demetrius and Lysander are under this spell. When Demetrius wakes up, he sees Helena and he falls in love with her too. So now both of the guys are in love with her and chasing after Helena. No one likes Hermia anymore. So Hermia is very upset because she had this whole plan to run away to the forest, get married to Lysander, and now Lysander has no interest in her, and they're both in love with her best friend. So the two guys argue about having a duel over Helena's affections, and the girls, Helena and Hermia, are fighting as well. So Puck, realizing the mess he got everybody into, uses his magic to basically trick the two couples into following him through the forest until they collapse in exhaustion, and then he reverses the charm on Lysander. So now they have it right. So Lysander and Hermia are together. Demetrius is still in love with Helena, even though it's through magic. So Oberon finds Titania sleeping happily with Bottom. They're together. Nick Bottom doesn't ask any questions. He's got a beautiful queen who's in love with him. Oberon comes across them and he reverses the spell on Titania, and she wakes up. So after reconciling, they recount the stories of the night because they both had pretty crazy nights. Theseus comes into the woods in the morning as well and finds the two couples sleeping happily, Lysander and Hermia together, and Helena and Demetrius. Aegeus, I'm going to say, demands that Lysander be punished for running away and with his daughter into the woods. Demetrius explains that he doesn't love Hermia, he loves Helena. So now the dad, who had this all planned out, that his daughter was going to marry Demetrius, now Demetrius, who was okay with it, is now saying, no, I don't want to be with her, I want to be with her best friend. So he's coming into it, has no idea what occurred over the night either. So Duke Theseus arranges for the two couples to have their wedding in Athens with them as well. And after all the commotion, Bottom wakes up as a human again and is convinced that everything was a dream because it was one night and it made no sense. It was totally crazy, so why not? In Act 5, we see the marriage of these three couples, the Duke, Helena and Demetrius, and Hermia and Lysander. And then, so it's kind of a happy ending for all of the couples involved. And then the group of workmen, including Nick Bottom, put on their play, Pyramus and Thisbe, and it's a huge disaster. It's kind of like a car wreck when they say it's so bad, you have to keep, you can't look away, you have to keep watching. So they're all having a good time watching watching this awful play at their wedding and celebrating. At the end of the night, the couples go to bed, and Puck gives his kind of famous recap of the events of the night before and reminds us that, if you didn't like it, it was just a dream. So, or symbolically, it was just a play, it was just made up. So, what's the worst that happened? So that's a pretty short, hopefully not too confusing, summary of the show. What's in a name, which is, such a popular Shakespearean quote. Something to note about Shakespeare in his writing, he oftentimes would name his characters with something so that the audience knew, even before they came on stage, something about this character. So, for example, in this show, Oberon, the king of the fairies, this word derives from a German word meaning powerful elf. So pretty literal, So anyone in the time would know, okay, he's a big, important, powerful person, and an elf, a fairy, But something funny is that scholars who studied Shakespeare believe that Bottom and his cast, his crew, were all original characters. So a lot of his characters, came from mixing and matching, of his own shows or of other shows from the past. But this group of characters were entirely his own. It's believed that they were inspired by actors in Shakespeare's own company, which is a really great little nod to, his friends and his actors. And their names are all puns for their professions in the show. So there's quince, which is a wedge a carpenter uses to level a joint, and starveling was probably named after the Elizabethan caricature of a rail-thin tailor. The pastoral play. So back to this idea of nature. This was a very popular genre in Shakespeare's day. It was characterized by the idea of wanting to escape the confines of society in favor of life surrounded by nature and tranquility. So in these pastoral comedies like Midsummer, young couples would often flee the confines of the city and urban life for the forest, for nature, for freedom, to live as they wanted to live. Fairies. Puck was or Robin Goodfellow, as he's also called, is he would have been a very well-known character to Elizabethan audiences at the time. He would be recognized for his ability to shapeshift, as he does in the show, to kind of become what he needs people to see him as, to do his tricks. And also because in one scene he carries a broom. So this was kind of based on folklore at the time. They knew this character. However, Shakespeare's Puck was not so malicious. He was more just kind of a fun, quirky kind of character. In Puck's final monologue, like I mentioned, he makes an important analogy between the play and the dream state. So Midsummer is a play very much concerned revolving around dreaming. And it kind of flips the script on sleeping versus waking. So the things that are happening in their waking existence during that night in the woods it isn't real. It would very much be something that would happen in a dream. So he kind of flips this idea of dreaming and waking on their sides to have a little fun with what's reality. Puck's ambiguity, his proposal of this idea, the characters within the play must accept that dreams are a dimension of our lives, or a part of our life. And to an extent, that's true. You could look at it as, a lot of people talk about hopes and dreams. Your dream is this far off ideal of, what you hope to accomplish, which is a funny way to see how that word has kind of evolved over time, that it isn't just a literal dream while you're sleeping, but it's also a fanciful ideal. In the forest experience, in that night in the forest, everyone in the show, all these characters, their eyes are opened in different ways. So they all came to the woods with different intentions, and most of them not necessarily bad, but kind of taboo, or not helpful, not necessarily nice things, tricking each other or trying to run away. And so we see this in this one night, how all of the characters, their eyes are opened and their minds are kind of changed. So all these characters went into the woods with this purpose that wasn't necessarily malicious or bad, but wanting to trick each other or wanting to run away. So they had this initial idea of what they wanted to do, and instead, for most of them, their eyes were opened to a totally new experience. Whether or not they realized it, it probably went over their head because they were under a magic spell. But for most of them, they had this big significant change. Adaptations. So it's likely Midsummer was first performed in 1595 or 1596 at a wedding for the aristocracy, because it has this central theme of love, and it's a lighter show with lots of levity and humor, and couplings and weddings in it. It makes for a great entertainment to put on at a wedding. So it was very popular to do that in the aristocracy at the time, once the show came out. There were radical changes made to the show during the English Civil War in 1642, because there was so much upheaval and societal and political drama happening. The audience didn't want to be entertained with more chaos. So the fairies were cut, the couples were cut, the four lovers were cut. So very different kind of show, because the audience came to see Shakespeare to escape, but they didn't want to escape into more chaos. They wanted more predictability and stability. And so the producers and the theaters at the time, really, really adapted the shows to work for what their people wanted to see. When the English throne was restored in 1660, and life kind of began to return to normal, more or less, Charles II really supported the theater in England, and it really started to flourish and grow. A few different adaptations of Midsummer. There was a rustic comedy turned into a full opera by composer Henry Purcell, called The Fairy Queen, in 1692. Composer Felix Mendelssohn created a score for an 1843 production in Potsdam, which inspired lavish stagings of the show during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In 1911, a production featured live rabbits hopping around the actors' feet on the stage. So some people really took the idea of, escaping to nature seriously. Film directors in the early 20th century capitalized on this idea of nature, because they could fulfill a lot of scenes that you couldn't do on stage. So they became a lot more successful at creating this elaborate, forest and nature scenes. thanks to film technology that was only improving. In 1935, Max Reinhardt produced a Midsummer film with Mickey Rooney as Puck, and it had a cast of 1,000 people because they had so many fairies and extras. They really wanted to capitalize on this, idea of being able to use a set and make a movie and just pour in, this and that and this lavish staging on the screen. Chicago Shakespeare Theater produced Midsummer in 2012, and they had it set in early 19th century Europe at the time of Sigmund Freud, who you may know is the father of psychoanalysis and modern dream theory. So they're pulling in this idea of honoring kind of the dream state symbolism in the show by bringing in kind of a big name in psychology and in dreaming. The character of Puck was kind of supposed to be an interpretation on Dr. Freud himself. So he's the one kind of pulling the strings, which is a very interesting take on Shakespeare. So those are some looks at different ways that people have celebrated Midsummer and changed it up and taken liberties with it in some ways too. It's a really, really fun show. And we've seen some other interpretations in movies and different interpretations on the stage. So you may have seen Dead Poets Society, where they have kind of a subplot of the main character performing in Midsummer Night's Dream as Puck. There's also a show called A Midsummer Night's Rave, which is a movie where Puck is a drug dealer and the magic flower is actually ecstasy. So it's a very different kind of underground modern take on the fairies and what the magic is all about. There's a movie called A Midsummer's Nightmare, which, as you can imagine, is a scary movie with kind of a lot of the same stories and plots, but just a scary version of it. And Dream of a Summer Night, which is an 80s Italian rock musical interpretation. Very interesting. And then a couple more. LA Story, which you can see in the picture, has got Steve Martin and Sarah Jessica Parker in it. It was kind of a rom-com, a romantic comedy, which is probably the best way to describe what Midsummer Night's Dream really is in modern day. It's a romantic comedy. It's full of love and it's full of laughter, and it's really meant to just make you relax and enjoy and have fun and get swept up in the story. Get Over It is a teen comedy that features the music. They wrote their own kind of music based around the show and tried to intertwine the story with some original kind of 90s, early 2000s music and twists on it. And Wood Love, which is a 1925 German silent comedy based on Midsummer Night's Dream. So a lot of different people have taken this story in different ways to different places at different times. But what we're going to see now is the 1999 film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So their best interpretation of the actual play, rather than an 80s Italian rock opera. So this film was directed by Michael Hoffman, and it stars Kevin Kline as Nick Bottom and Stanley Tucci as Puck. So I hope you'll enjoy this screening of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we'll see you for another Shakespeare lesson soon. Bye-bye.